Aspects are one of the most important function of our analysis of a chart because it involves the art of synthesis. There are two stages to really study and practice astrology. One of them is to understand the different parts. So we understand what Saturn is, and we understand what the moon is, and we understand what each sign means. But when we start working with aspects, we start to synthesize these different components. And that's where it becomes a little more complex. And yet that's what astrology is about. It's a fusion of many different forces. So when we study aspects, we basically move to that new step where we need to learn to bring these two elements or more together. So a lot about the aspect is about the art of synthesis, which I hope will practice a little more and get you all more confident and more clear about how to use them and what they mean and what's the best way to really interpret them. So there's a question from Harumi. When we have a question, if you share your desktop, you cannot see the chat. I can see the chat. You can all, if you have the bar, you just click on the more, and then you click on chat, and you should be able to see. So this is audio only view. No, you should see the chat. Okay. So use the chat for your questions. You don't need the Q&A panel. So where does it begin? Just one moment. This is the natural wheel of the zodiac starting at 0 Aries. And we see the main aspects with that wheel. So the conjunction 0 degrees from the Aries point, semi-sextile 30 degrees from that Aries point, below and above the horizon. Then sextile 60 degrees above and below the horizon, the square 90 degrees, the trine 120 degrees, the quincunx 150 degrees, and the opposition 180 degrees. In many ways, we see that this natural wheel divides the circle of 360 into this different compartment. And in many ways, there is a direct correlation between the nature of the aspect and the natural zodiac wheel. So, for example, the semi-sextile is from Aries to Taurus and from Aries to Pisces. The sextile is Aries to Gemini and Aries to Aquarius. The square is Aries to Cancer and Aries to Capricorn. The trine, Aries to Leo and Aries to Sagittarius. The quincunx, Aries to Virgo and Aries to Scorpio. And the opposition is Aries to Libra. So as we understand this correlation, we can already have a glimpse into the meaning of each aspect. We understand there's a phasal relationship between the aspects. Just like a new moon, a crescent moon, a first square moon, a gibbous moon, a full moon, and so forth. As you can also see, there are two types for each aspect, except for the conjunction and the opposition. So there's an opening semisextile and there's a closing semisextile, an opening sextile and closing sextile, opening square and closing square, and so forth. And that is important to also consider as we proceed. But before we actually go and identify all the aspects, there's another perspective to look for, and that is to understand what we call harmonics. Harmonics are basically a division of the 360-degree circle into the different parts. So the conjunction is 360 divided by itself or divided by 1, and that's a 0 aspect. We're not taking orbs yet into consideration. 360 divided by 2 is the opposition, 360 divided by 3 is the trine, 360 by 4 is the square, by 5 is a 72-degree aspect, by 6 is the sextile, by 7 is the 51.7 aspect, which is a septile, by 8 it's a semi-square, 45, by 9 40 degrees, by 10 36 degrees, by 11 32.7, by 12 we have 30, the semi-sextile. So how do we apply this? You look back at the wheel and you make the connections. So in the wheel there are, from the Aries point, 12 semi-sextile, 30 to 30, 30 to 60, 60 to 90, 90 to 120, and so forth. So this is basically the division of 12, creating 12 semi-sextile increments. Then divided by 2, we have 2 opposition from Aries to Libra, and then from Libra to Aries. There are 2 hemispheres. By 3, we have Aries to Leo, 1, Leo to Sag, 2, Sag to Aries, 3. The square divided by 4, Aries to Cancer, 1, Cancer to Libra, 2, Libra to Capricorn, 3, and Capricorn to Aries again, 4, and so forth. So we will look more into these as we go through our classes, but it's important to pay attention to them. And as you will see, they will not always, these harmonics will not always begin at the beginning of a sign. For example, the 70, it's all very clean until the square, which is divided by 4, and it's 4 quarters. But when you start with a quintile, it's 72 degrees. So 72 degrees would be from Aries to 12 Gemini, and then from 12 Gemini to 24 Leo, and so forth. So it's not, always going according to the 30 degrees clean increments. And yet, those divisions, the 72, the 51.7, the 45, the 36, are important. These are also important divisions between planets, connections. But we will elaborate more about that as we proceed. I just want to show you, first of all, what we're working with. So we refer to this term harmonics because it creates a certain resonance in the wider circle. There's a natural, it's like the scale of music. There's a natural harmony from one division to another. It creates a different tone, a different rhythm, and a different correlation between the different aspects. But if we strip down the theory and just go to the basic principle, what are aspects? What is it actually? So let's look at a chart, today's chart. Let's do it for now. Now it's 9:50. Here it is. So this is the chart for our current moment. I'm just going to select this option. And what do we see? Planets are positioned in different places. They're each in a sign, which is just a position in the sky, and then they're in a house. But the next step is to understand that they interact with each other. We are approaching a full moon, so the moon is opposing the sun. The moon is opposing Jupiter. The sun is conjunct Jupiter. So we have a whole configuration here of planets that are in close proximity to one another. Okay, the chart isn't showing. Let me show. All right, this should resolve it. So here we see the chart of this moment. We see again the full moon, sun in Scorpio, moon in Taurus, sun, Jupiter, conjunction, and the opposition to the moon by both of them. So what we see is that, first of all, aspects between planets connect these planets, but there's also a range. Even if they are not on the same degree, they are still close enough to each other, or they are still within orb of each other. So I assume, most of you are not absolute beginners in astrology and understand the concept of orb. I won't start now defining that, but we will get to that a little later to define these orbs. But just suffice it to say that the distance between Jupiter and the Sun is 6 degrees. There was an exact conjunction a few days ago. If we go back, just a moment. On the 27th, make it even more precise. So here we see the Sun and Jupiter at pretty much exact conjunction at 3 degrees Scorpio on October 26th. And as the Sun moves faster than Jupiter, we go back to our current position, and now it's 6 degrees apart. So the range, the orb, is about 10 degrees. That's, when you can still consider that these planets are together and they are influencing each other. And as the Sun moves beyond 10 degrees, that the effect of the conjunction fades. So you have to understand that, we speak of nature, so it doesn't simply drop from yes, there's an aspect to the next moment. No, there's no aspect. It's a gradual decrease. As you move into the 9, 10, 11 degree orb, the aspects fade. But beyond the technicalities, what is that? Before we get into the specific aspects of the conjunction, or any other aspect, let's just understand that aspects are simply a communication, a connection between planets. So before you start to label it, what it is, a conjunction or a square or an opposition, call it a lifeline, call it a channel, an exchange of energy. So basically, there's a channel established between Jupiter and the Sun, and that opposition to the Moon involves a channel to the Moon. Now, before you, again, complicate the equation by trying to define what exactly does it mean to have an opposition versus a square versus a conjunction, simplified by first of all understanding they talk to each other, they need to understand each other, and they need to work together. Doesn't matter what else is involved. So your job as an astrologer is to understand, first of all, Jupiter in Scorpio alone, then the Sun in Scorpio alone, and then understand how both of them work together. The same thing with the Moon, how the Sun in Scorpio works alone, how the Moon in Taurus works alone, and now how they actually work together. And obviously, this will lead to some contradictions. Some of these qualities will enhance, will support each other, some of these qualities will conflict with each other, and there is going to be stress between the planets involved in the aspect. However, the fundamental premise is that it doesn't matter how much stress there may be, they need to overcome that stress. And they need to learn to balance each other, because there's a reason why these two planets are together. And from our point of view, as counselors, as astrology readers, our role is to first of all understand what the challenge is, what the stress is about, and then provide guidance, direction about how to resolve whatever stress is there, and how to have these two planets actually cooperate. Because there is no mistake in nature. There is nothing that is meant to um, live without the other. So everything in nature is complementing. Even if it appears to be so different, there's always a common purpose and a common goal that we need to establish in order to resolve whatever stress or challenge um, we may identify. So this brings us um, to understanding that there's no such thing as an aspect that is doomed to create problems, or an aspect that guarantees success. Any aspect has its share of support and its share of challenge. So when you say, this is a good aspect, they work together, they get along, these planets, and then you say these two don't get along, and you're basically boxing this into definitions that are very narrow and are not really depicting the situation accurately. The reason is that from an evolutionary point of view, if we speak about the evolution of consciousness in astrology, we understand that there is movement in the chart, that the chart is not just a static geometric design. The chart can be expressed differently. There is an element of free will that that allows the person to utilize whatever is in the chart in a different way. So two people born with the same chart will not necessarily express this energy the same way. So the same way, one person may struggle with one aspect of their chart, for the first 20 years, and they will keep bumping into walls and creating crisis and suffering. But then at some point, they may learn their lesson and harmonize these two forces and learn to actually transmute this energy and make the best of it. So that's our role as counselors, is to guide the person to understand what is the intent and how to synthesize these two energies. So let's do it. We go back to our Sun-Moon opposition. And let's define them separately. So What is the purpose of the sun in Scorpio? And that's an open question. If some of you would like to answer, you can type your replies and I'll read it. Sun in Scorpio. Alchemy, says Palma. What does that mean? Can you elaborate? A purpose and consciousness of empowerment through facing limitations, investing in transforming into a new lineage, to face the limitation and to transform by overcoming a challenge. Okay, so these are, these are accurate definitions of the energy of Scorpio and the sun principle, soul growth through an exchange of resources. Jeff, I think everyone is using the chat. Can you read the other comments? Yeah, they're all here. So make sure when you type, you can choose all panelists or all panelists and attendees. Great. So going back, the sun has to do with our sense of purpose in life, with our creativity, and along with that, with what we leave as a legacy to this world. This includes our work, our contribution to this, in the course of our lives. It includes our children, anything that we basically manifested. So when the sun is in Scorpio, we will face experiences of powerlessness and power where our sense of purpose is going to be exposed to limitations. Our capacity to create will face some limitations because Scorpio wants to expand and transform and is looking for a way to basically increase potency, gain more power. So a person with a sun in Scorpio may initially feel that their purpose is not meaningful enough, that maybe people are trying to sabotage their purpose, or that no one is interested in their purpose. The Scorpio experiences rejection. And so they may have a lot of doubt and question about what am I going to do with my life, and who am I, and how can I really make a difference? And they're going to look around them and see their family and see their teachers and all the people who are contributors. And they're going to assess if their contribution is worth the while, if it's worth the effort, if it's impactful enough, if that legacy is a good legacy or is it a bad legacy. And so we're having that whole experience with our sense of purpose and with our legacy. And the Scorpio waters will continually bring doubt, redefinition, shadow work, and questions. So eventually, as the Scorpio will assess all these questions, they will, they will try to change their creative approach so that it indeed, leaves the mark that is intended. So some Scorpios will come on too strong and they will impose their creativity on others, and they're going to be, very defensive about their legacy and about their contribution, and can push their agenda on others. And then that's going to create a backlash, and it's going to create rejection. Others will want to make sure that whatever they do is very meaningful and impactful. So they're not going to do anything unless it's meaningful and impactful. So they're going to want to strike something powerful and precise. And therefore, they're going to wait for the auspicious time to activate whatever they want to do. So there basically are going to be different expressions based on that same intention. And that's obviously, there's a lot more we can say, but for the sake of our example, let's keep it to that. In opposition to that, we have a moon in Taurus. So the moon in Taurus, what is it about? Anyone? Moon in Taurus. Getting in touch with our inner self and value. Sensuality is a general Taurus attribute, but what is the moon in Taurus? Seeks stability and beauty, emotional security. Emotional security is a moon. But how does that emotional security work in Taurus? What is it dependent on? This is where we do synthesis. Some of you describe moon attributes, some of you describe Taurus attributes. How does it work together? My sense of security, moon, depends on having solid ground, on having consistency, and having a very peaceful and harmonious environment. So the sense of security is the moon, and how that sense of security is applied is defined by the Taurus placement, which is about solidity, consistency, physical strength, financial accessibility, resources. So my sense of security, moon, depends on being able to afford paying the rent every month, or living financially comfortably. So if we bring the sensuality, the moon is basically the way you perceive the world. It's your glasses, it's your lens. Everything that you feel, everything that you experience, every person you meet is going to be filtered through the moon. And if your moon is in Taurus, then that's how your filter works. It works you have a Taurus filter. That's part of segment B. You can review that material. So when I have a Taurus moon filter, how do I see the world? I see, I see basically what is strong versus what isn't tangible, isn't uh, solid. I will filter everything through my senses. To me, in order to relate to something with a Taurus moon, you can't just tell it to me. I need to touch it. I need to experience it in order to retain it. So a Taurus moon will experience everything on a visceral level, not on a mental level, but on a physical level. Excuse me. And based on that, they will always assess what is durable, what is reliable, what can I bet on, where would I put my money? And so the Taurus moon, it seeks security and durability in everything. They seek harmony and beauty, and that's how they relate to the world. So, in a nutshell, that's what the moon in Taurus seeks. So we have a sun in Scorpio that is constantly struggling and transforming their sense of purpose and legacy, and basically making sure things around them will change so that they will actually make the intended impact. Whereas the moon in Taurus doesn't want change. It wants to choose things that are stable and solid and strong and durable. So there you have a stress, because they each strive for different things. And yet, they are in opposition, which means they are here to balance each other. They need to talk. Like, you need to bring that sun and moon and put them in the same room and basically have them have a conversation. So the stability that the moon is seeking needs to balance itself with the changes necessary for the sun in Scorpio to actualize its purpose. So one is change seeking, the other one is stability seeking. How are we going to do that? It seems like it's two different orientations and needs. Now, the next thing you need to do as you create this synthesis is to see what they do have in common. Because no matter how weird, opposite, conflicted two placements, two planets may appear, they always have also a common ground that we need to detect and see how they will amplify that very same that very same purpose or intention or nature. So, what is common? What unites that Sun in Scorpio and Moon in Taurus? Focus on life, desire for strength, absolutely. Resourcefulness, value system. So both the Sun in Scorpio and the Moon in Taurus seek wealth. And I don't mean wealth just on a financial level, but wealth on every level. They seek a rich experience, something strong. I mean, the difference is that Scorpio has a different way of creating strength than Taurus, but ultimately they both want strength. They're both intense. So they're both very resource oriented and resourceful. They're both also very strong sexual energies. So we can see that the emotional nature of the Moon in Taurus is also connecting through the senses, through sexuality. You know, there's a natural need for this person to be touched, to be seen, to be stimulated, and to be in their body in the first place. And the Sun in Taurus has a very strong desire um, to influence, to impact, to touch other people, including sexually. So they have that intensity, that emotional intensity, and their need to bring life is going to also activate, you know, the sexual presence, the need to affect people sexually. And so there's also a very, very strong sexual nature in this person born with this full moon. um, Very creative, very um, resourceful, very sexual, and seeking that empowerment. So that's how we continue our journey. And so we see the different modes and we see the common grounds and we understand that this Sun and Moon now operate as a unit, as a family, maybe a dysfunctional family, a dysfunctional relationship, or a functional relationship, whatever it is. They cannot not respond to each other. So that Sun will always be linked to that Moon in this chart and will always be linked to that Jupiter in this chart. That Sun is not alone, it's mitigated by these other energies. And so that Sun that is always trying to transform will always need to compromise and pay attention to the Moon need for peace and stability and positive um, sensual experiences. So that Moon will diffuse some of the sun's doubts and tendency to constantly destroy and rebuild, that moon will mitigate that the intensity of the sun. And the same way, the sun will have to confront the moon when it sets too much into its comfort zone. Because the moon in Taurus is notorious for resisting change and wanting to hold down to situations, and or even if something is not working, they will try to absorb the problems, sometimes even put them under the rug. So a typical moon in Taurus doesn't want to face the problems, doesn't want to confront um, the shadows, the pain. It wants to keep things aesthetic, emotionally and physically. But when it's opposing a sun in Scorpio, it has no choice but to get outside the comfort zone and face those challenges. So the moon um, learns to overcome that fear of change, and the sun learns to dampen the need for constant intensity and transformation. And when they come together and they actually balance each other, you have a healthier expression of both the moon and the sun, because it's not going to be excessively um, you know looking for the dirt and looking for the problems, and it's not going to be excessively avoiding problems. There is going to be a healthy balance. And what are we actually describing here? Through the aspects, as these planets form relationships, the Taurus learns a bit about the Scorpio, and the Scorpio learns about the Taurus, and the Sun learns about Jupiter, and the Saturn learns about the Uranus, and every planet forming an aspect has to include the energies of that other planet in order to eventually work together. We basically learn that we ultimately learn to become all the signs. We are interacting with many players in our chart, but we're actually interacting with many energies. And ultimately, it's a repetition of all the 12 signs through the planets, through the houses, through the signs. And we're learning to basically synthesize those energies. So here it's through a sun-moon opposition. But, other aspects do the same. So we're bringing the pieces of the whole zodiac together. Does that make sense? Any question? Okay. So what is important as we looked at, the sun and the moon and the full moon, we also learn the interaction between the planets themselves. The full moon unites the sun and the moon in an aspect. What is the sun and moon? As a pair, they also create a unit. And it is our role as astrologers to understand what each pair symbolizes. So when we look at the sun-moon opposition, we're looking at the pair of the sun and moon, and we have to go back and track where that pair started. So we learn that aspects are not only, a flat, one-dimensional configuration. Oh, this person is born on a sun-moon opposition, and they're learning to combine these polarities. No, this is just scratching the surface. It's not inaccurate, but it's incomplete. So what we need to do is to go back to the moment of inception, which means the moment these two planets actually conjuncted prior to this opposition. So I'm going here to new moon, and I'm going to track when that was. The new moon that you can all see the chart, I believe, yes. The new moon started October 19, 2017 at 26 Libra. And it was in direct opposition to Uranus at 26 Aries. Interestingly, the Sun, in this case, is the ruler of the North Node, and Uranus is the ruler of the South Node. So the ruler of the nodes were in opposition as the Sun-Moon came together. It's very powerful. This means that, going back to our moon phases, this means that today's full moon, and it's going to be exact at 11 Scorpio, 11 Taurus later tonight, this full moon is actually a continuation of the initial new moon that started 2 weeks ago. Now, we need to understand what this cycle is about, but we need to understand, first of all, what the sun-moon is about. Just a moment, I'm bringing back. So, what is the sun-moon pair about? And as we understand what this pair is about, we can start to track their relationship from conjunction to conjunction. going back to our, the conjunction, the semi-sextile, sextile, square, trine, da-da-da-da. We are now at the opposition, and we're going to, from the opposition point, we're going to close the cycle back to the next conjunction. So what are they about? Sun, moon, anyone? So Danny says, the filter through which we experience our lives. Rachel says, your essence, they are luminaries, they reflect your inner light. Angie says, taking a very personal approach to what we invest our energy into. Personal processing, exactly. Sun expression, moon reflection. So, we can conclude they are the combo that is our ego, exactly. So the sun and the moon energy as a unit, as a pair, reflect our personal experience of life. Everything, all the knowledge, the meetings, the experiences we have are activated, internalized through the sun and the moon. It is what makes us who we are. So the moon processes, digests the imprinting, the experiences, and the sun activates, delivers. It is our engine. So the sun and the moon reflect basically our individual consciousness through the inner and outer direction. So when we track the moon phases, and we track them also in our own chart, we can go back to the initial conjunction and see what the intention, the original intention of the particular aspect that we are working with is about. So if we look at the moon, the last new moon, when they came together, the intention was to bring balance, to harmonize between people, to bring diversity into our personal life. Libra is about bringing the polarities, the mental and the physical, the dark and the light, the male and the female, whatever, and trying to bring them together. And the opposition to Uranus says we need to do that in a completely different way. We need to bring newness to the way we operate personally. So Uranus says, whatever you've been doing so far is boring, it's old, it's obsolete. It needs to be upgraded. So that whole personal development and personal activation and leading of our personal life is now, through that Uranus opposition, challenged to upgrade, to change, to redirect, and to possibly brainstorm about new ways of doing your life, of doing you. Like, how are you going to be you from this point on? Uranus says, enough. You've done whatever you did for a while. It's time for a change. And so now, even though the full moon is not necessarily aspecting that same Uranus, because that was the original seeding, that's actually what it still works on. And so I would recommend you do that with your natal chart. You know, you look at your moon sun um, disposition and try to see what was the original imprinting, what was the conjunction, the new moon prior to your birth. But beyond that, I'm going to complicate your life and your analysis. You do that with every pair of planets. So does the seeding always comes from the new moon as far as the sun moon are concerned? But if you look at, let's say, um, we go back to our chart here, and we see that as there is a new moon, excuse me, as we are now on a full moon, 11 to 11, there's also a Venus Uranus exact opposition today. So what you're going to do is you are going to understand, first of all, you start flat. What's Venus in Libra? Venus seeks satisfaction. Venus seeks relationships. If it's in Libra, it will find satisfaction through social exchanges. It will find satisfaction by comparing notes with other people, seeing different lifestyle, different perspectives. It always wants to bring two sides to the story, Venus in Libra. Uranus in Aries says we need to change the way we do things. Action, Aries, change, Uranus. So our mode of action, Aries, needs to be upgraded, Uranus. This is why a lot of things we do don't work. Uranus in Aries brings a great deal of crisis because it confronts us with our obsolete mode of action. And it prompts us to think differently, to do differently, to act faster, to take our lives and to take the world to the next level. So Uranus in Aries is a change maker. It's very restless energy, and it is about taking action. Whereas Venus in Libra is contemplating and it's comparing notes and trying to see what everybody else is doing. So what we see here is that there is a need to change the way we are in relationships, change the way we bring satisfaction and balance into our lives. I'll give you a very immediate example. There was there was a student that complained about a teacher who was, what word can we say, who was prejudiced about certain ideas. And that student complained that it's not right to have a teacher that is not tolerant. And then this brought a whole discussion about, but wait a minute, Venus in Libra says, what about the teacher's side of the story? We're hearing one side of the story, and Venus is not satisfied until we hear both sides of the story. That's how we're going to get our satisfaction, our peace. And Uranus says it's not enough to hear both sides of the story. We need to change something about the system, about the relationship. So you see basically how you operate. You start with one planet, then you go to the other planet, and then you see how they talk to each other, how they challenge each other. And once you establish that, you can also go back to the original conjunction. When did this cycle between Uranus and Venus initially started? Right? And the conjunction was on June 3rd, 2017. So you see here, just a moment, there's a question. Sun and Moon, Inga and Ida and Pingala satisfy mutual completion through equanimity, the seeding of original conjunction for all planets in the charts. Okay. So we go back to that original cycle, which started June 3rd, 2017, between Uranus and Venus. That's when the seeding started. And it was at the same degree, 27 Aries. So you analyze that and you try to understand what the intention was at that conjunction, because the opposition today relates directly to the June 3rd date. Now, why is that important to go back? Because you are going to see that every time when you understand the pair and you understand what Venus and Uranus in this case are trying to do, you are going to understand all their aspects through the whole zodiac much better. Because from that point on, when the conjunction occurs, it's like the bell is ringing. This is, the important moment of activation. And then Venus moves faster than Uranus, so it's going to semi-sextile it, square it, trine it, quincunx it, and then it's going to oppose it, and so forth. So when you look at this whole process, you start to understand that events are going to happen in the world around those times, activating it like a clock. The same process is going to to be activated in our lives personally and in the collective according to these interactions, aspect interactions. So this is very important to track when you look at transits in particular. Let's go back to, let's see. I believe this was just double checking. 19. So on October 5th, we had both a full moon and a new Mars-Venus conjunction at 19 degrees Virgo. Now, interestingly, Mars and Venus relate to relationships. And they happen to be the ruler of the Sun in Libra and the Moon in Aries. So this is really very powerful because the ruler of the full moon are in that conjunction. But they also happen to square Saturn in Sag. So that new conjunction between Venus and Mars squares Saturn. What do you think may be the intention of this new relationship cycle? If it's in Virgo and it squares Saturn, does it work to heal old wounds? Get discerning. Time to get your relationship shit right. Okay, so Virgo brings a need to fix, a need to improve, a need to discern, a need to look at the details and the things that need work on. Adjust the dysfunction along with your truth. Exactly. Now, people that are born on Venus-Mars conjunctions, they are going to feel very agitated in relationships, no matter what sign it is, because they're born at a time where they need to create something new in their relationships. And so they're going to try to break old patterns. And they're going to, because of that, be more rebellious, be more reactive. They're going to be, the change makers. On a soul level, they're simply building a new pattern, and they want to plant those seeds. Now, this particular cycle in Virgo, happens to square Saturn, happens to oppose Chiron, happens to be the rulers of the full moon. So it seems to carry a tremendous weight. Now, what is the square to Saturn? Mars is how I do things. Venus is what I get from you. You know, I'm simplifying, of course, but it's the give and take. It's the action and response. It's the natural self versus the need to accommodate others. And that's why it has a lot to do with what we want to do with our lives and how we work with others. Relationships. Now, we talked about Mars, Venus in Virgo needing to adjust, to fix, needing to launch a new cycle, to bring healing, to bring better function. You know, Venus and Mars says in this conjunction in Virgo says, you know, I've been in many relationships. I've been in many relationships that didn't work. I need now to make it work, Virgo. But it squares Saturn. And Saturn is in Sagittarius. And what does it add to this? We need now to incorporate that channel, that communication. Saturn is immediately communicating with that new Mars-Venus cycle, and it's sending its message. What is it? Excessive limitations. What do you mean? Boundaries crossed. Ethics of your belief systems. Yes. What is your truth to manifest? So Saturn brings a dimension of ethics, brings a dimension of teacher, authority, laws, integrity. In Sagittarius, it has to do with honesty, with authenticity, with truth. What is the truth? So maybe a lot of our work in relationships with that Mars Venus in Virgo has to immediately refer to a need to be honest, a need to have integrity, a need to speak the truth. And maybe it also has to do with belief systems, with the way a couple perceives life. Maybe they have different points of views. Maybe they have different religions that they need to basically reconcile. Maybe there was dishonesty. Maybe one side had to repress their truth. So is that a coincidence that a couple, 10 days later, we have this whole Hollywood sexual scandal blow into massive proportions? And addressing ethical issues, addressing the misuse of authority in relationships, and questions of integrity, and the need to fix what was broken. Now, interesting. Let me think. Let's look at Kevin Spacey's birthday, which is, I believe, July 26, 1959, in the morning. So Kevin Spacey is an actor who was accused of crossing boundaries with co-workers, especially younger boys, younger men. And he was accused of imposing himself sexually, crossing boundaries. What do you see in this chart? He is born under a Venus-Mars conjunction in Virgo. So he basically has a recurrence of that new cycle. If we compare nodes, you know, it's in the same sign, not the same degree. In his natal case, it's also conjunct Pluto in the second house. But no wonder, you know, he was activated. Now, the whole thing for him, you know, we see when the cycle began, but when was it activated? It was activated on the 29th around 9 p.m. when when that first person came out and shared a story that Kevin, you know, was very inappropriate when that person was only 14 years old. So we see that this was all activated when Mars actually touched his North Node in Libra. So that whole Mars-Venus in his natal chart, the ruler Mars-Venus in Virgo, happen to be the ruler of his nodes, Aries, Libra. And when Mars hits that North Node and Venus hits his angles and his moon, there's an event. Something happens. And, you know, he's now facing these circumstances, these accusations. Additionally, I mean, we can go beyond and see that Neptune in the 8th house is opposing his Venus. The moment all this occurred, the moon was exactly opposing his Pluto, Mars. So other players come into the scene, but we're still dealing with the initial Mars-Venus cycle. Let's look at Harvey and check if Harvey Weinstein was the Hollywood producer that basically was first exposed as an abuser following this Venus-Mars conjunction. I don't have the exact time of birth, so I'm going to put a sun on the ascendant. So, interestingly, what do you see in Harvey Weinstein's chart? I hadn't even looked at it, but there it is. When Venus and Mars conjunction started and the need to fix relationship came to the forefront, and we talked about a time where there was an exact full moon in Aries Libra, that full moon was exactly on his Saturn in the seventh house. Saturn has to do with ethics, integrity, boundaries, use of authority. So the full moon happened to be on his Saturn, which is natally in a relationship sign and house. And that's how you can start to unpack things. And importantly, what I'm trying to convey here is that aspects is a whole relationship complex between planets. We start with a pair, and we begin at the moment of conjunction, the moment where it all starts, and then we see as one moves faster and separates from the other, events that were intended, seeded in the conjunction, are being activated as that faster planet moves like a small hand of the clock across the zodiac. And that's how you're going to basically observe cycles and patterns in astrology, and you're going to be able to track the history unfolding, the history, your own history, and the history of humanity. It's all about cycles. I want to show you something else. Excuse me. Going back to our PowerPoint, I just took this example. This is the Concorde airplane. This was, a major breakthrough, fastest passenger plane invented, created by the French and British. And it went through, many struggles. But that was the date, March 2nd, 1969, was the date when it actually had its first test flight. So we don't know, I don't know exactly when, the idea came together as far as, what's available on the internet, but this was the date of its first flight. And what we can see is some interesting aspects. Pluto, South Node, Uranus, Jupiter conjunct together. And we pay attention. I isolated the Pluto-Jupiter conjunction and the Uranus nodes. Now, what we have to understand is that this is a technological breakthrough. And this is, the fastest plane, passenger plane. And because of that, it is also usually a service to wealthy people. Because, if you want to afford to fly the Concorde, you're going to have to pay, double and triple the price. So why I'm bringing this up, because I want to understand the whole concept. It's not just a technological breakthrough, it's also about speed, and it's also about elite, and service for the elite. So once again, what is interesting to me when I look at this chart, I see the nodes are at 0. The north node is at 0 Aries. 0 Aries is a very potent degree to begin with. So the nodes, which is the sun-moon intercrossing orbit, is at exactly the 0 Aries point. So no wonder there's something really powerful happening when this transit occurs. On top of it, Chiron and Uranus, Jupiter, Pluto are on that node. Uranus is speed. Uranus is airplanes. Jupiter is travel. Pluto, Jupiter. Uranus, Jupiter. What are these pairs about? Let's begin with Uranus-Jupiter cycles. What do you think? Innovation, Mariam. Technological expansion. Absolutely. In a hurry to redefine and empower. Yeah. So both Uranus and Jupiter are conceptual. They're abstract. They're mental energies. They're not about carpentry. They're not about food. They're about the future, vision, ideologies, new ideas, community. It's very utopian. It has a quality of wanting to bring ideas that will advance our way of thinking, our way of doing. So they bring a lot of they see new ideas, they see new creative concepts. They are the future. Many astrologers have Jupiter Uranus connections because it has to do with that expansive mindset, looking at the stars and seeing patterns in the sky to understand our lives. So it's the higher mind. And every time Jupiter and Uranus come together, you are going to have the activation of these larger concepts, these breakthroughs, these social changes, technological advances, community development. What else? Jupiter and Uranus. Uranus is scientific. Jupiter is religious and spiritual. So you have a need here to bring spirituality with technology, with science together. Or in other words, the rational mind with the abstract mind. Think about, they were conjunct on the nodes in 1969. What else happened in 1969? We went to the moon just a few months later. I mean, Not true. We were already on our way to the moon by that date because it took about 6 months to get there. So the whole process was activated and manifested during that Uranus Jupiter, the new frontier, the new concept, expanding our consciousness, looking at the universe differently. And landing on the moon was both a spiritual and a technological experience. So let's track that Jupiter Uranus and let's track the Pluto Jupiter. What is Pluto Jupiter conjunction about? I mean, it's a wide conjunction here. It's 9 degrees, but it's still, when we speak of a conjunction, we don't have to wait for events that happen on the actual day it happens. It's a cycle. So it's the whole time that these two planets are in proximity to each other. A big transformation and opportunity, evolutionary step. Right. Pluto is that midget. It's a tiny little object, and Jupiter is the largest. So first of all, you have two very, very potent and expansive energy. Both Pluto is transformative. Pluto wants increase, growth, transformation. Jupiter wants more, big, big. So they act very differently. Pluto acts through the underworld in that tiny size that fits every keyhole and can infiltrate in the most obscure places, whereas Jupiter is just plain, growth and abundance. So when you have Pluto-Jupiter aspects together, there's always this intense need for more, for growth, for, again, breaking boundaries, going beyond. And sometimes in a way that can be dangerous. It can be too much. It can be too explosive. But in a positive way, you have many people who really made a huge difference in our culture and who were extremely resourceful with the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. Typically, Pluto-Jupiter are people who can use every crisis into an opportunity. And we'll look at that, of course, because these are important cycles. So, back to our Concorde. I see the first flight with that massive configuration of Pluto, Jupiter, and Uranus nodes all together. Now, I look at the second phase. That's when the Concorde was actually introduced 7 years later to the commercial flights. So what do we see? 7 years later, another Pluto-Jupiter opposition. So during the conjunction, we had the first flight, test flight, And then during the opposition, we have the first commercial flight. Interestingly, Uranus is also close to the North Node. What is also interesting, because it's a 7-year cycle, you have, it's also a Saturn cycle. Saturn was squaring itself here in Aries when first test flight, and then in Cancer, first square in Cancer. Okay. Now, that's more. Mars-Neptune conjunction when the Concorde, with the first test flight, Mars-Neptune opposition during the commercial flight. Notice the Sun position, 0 Libra. Now our next chart is when there was a very dramatic crash in 2000, year 2000. And as a result of this crash, it basically, they decided to retire the airplane, even though the crash was not caused by technical failure, but it was caused by an object that the plane hit on a runway. Because the Concorde was such a costly, ineffective experiment, a breakthrough on the one hand, but a very challenging project that was not sustainable financially. They, that was kind of a breaking point. The crash was a breaking point that led to the decision to retire it. And this crash happens, lo and behold, exact Pluto-Jupiter opposition again. 24 years later, 24 years after its original commercial flight. The same cycle. So we're basically seeing a recurrence, the same clock, the same dance between Pluto and Jupiter. But not only Pluto and Jupiter, Mars, Neptune opposition on the nodes. So both the first commercial flight, Mars-Neptune opposition, Pluto-Jupiter opposition. And look at the Sun here. The Sun is at 0 Aquarius. The crash occurs when the Sun is at 2 degrees Leo, opposite the first flight Sun. Okay. So after that, after the crash, like we said, it was a big blow to the project. They decide to retire it. And when do they retire it? October 24th, 2003, 3 years later. It was the last flight. That's the end of the Concorde. Pluto, Jupiter square. Sun is now 0 Scorpio. So 0 Scorpio, 2 Leo, 0 Aquarius. 3 major events that define the unfolding of that project. Excuse me. And we're touching on one aspect. There's more here to be said. Mars here is in Pisces, so it's not in aspect to Neptune, but it's in the sign of Neptune. And that Mars opposes Jupiter as well. Interestingly, another thing you'll notice, just a moment. The Concord introduction in January 76 with the nodes at 18 Scorpio Taurus, and it's retired with the same nodes. How's that? Here the North Node is in Scorpio, here the North Node is in Taurus, so it's a reversed return. But it's what we see is a recurrence of cycles, and that's what we want to look at when we address aspects. We need to understand the greater context of aspects. Now, if I wanted to do a really even more thorough study, I would actually go into the history and see what happened with every Pluto-Jupiter conjunction, which occurs about every 14 years. So, if the first test flight in '69 was during the conjunction, the first commercial flight, the opposition, the crash, the opposition, the retirement, because the last square, I may want to look at, what happened to the Concorde in the year 1981 when Pluto and Jupiter were conjunct. And I would like to do that again with the next cycle in 2000, when was it, 2007, I think. Yeah, in December 2007, when Jupiter was conjunct Pluto again, a new cycle in Sagittarius. I am pretty sure that if we research those dates, 1981 and 2000, end of 2007, early 2008, when Jupiter-Pluto cycles began, there were conjunctions, you'll see that there was probably something going on with the Concord project during those years, because this project is immediately tied to that conjunction. So every time there is a conjunction, there's going to be some kind of activation, new things breaking down, new management, new routes, a major breakthrough, a major occurrence is going to happen in the life of this project. Now, that's how you're going to look at your own chart and the chart of, your clients. Let me get out of here. So the question here This is for things conjunct on our chart. Can you tell the nature of the event from the elements the planet were conjunct in? I was working with airline in 2008 and 7. The economy failure, all planes dropped their overhead expenses. True. Sue was mentioning that the industry changed in 2008, but that was end of 2008 and in 2009. So that conjunction was a year prior to those changes. However, it would be interesting to see what that transformation in the airline industry, what cycle was that under? And next time we'll look into that. Gas was very expensive, and that's what caused the the change in the industry. It was after the 2008 crash. So in response to Angie's question, is this for things conjunct in our chart? No, it's for any aspect. Of course, if you have a conjunction, then it means that you're born during that inception, during that time where the cycle begins. But let's say, we can share your chart. Do you mind if we look at your chart, Angie? So Angie here is born sorry. Can you hear me now? All right. So going back, Angie was born during a Mars-Venus conjunction, a Uranus-Pluto conjunction, and a Neptune-Jupiter conjunction. Now, this means that she's going to be particularly affected personally by every Mars-Venus conjunction. Every time it happens in the sky, doesn't matter where, every time there's a conjunction or an opposition between Mars and Venus, something is going to be activated in her relationships. So let's ask Angie. What happened around October 5th this year, as this new conjunction was not only a recurrence of your personal cycle, but it was also on your sun? My relationship has been in the quagmire. Can you explain to us mortals what this means? In a nutshell, I've been trying to perfect it for a long time. In this October, was that I had enough. So this was a breaking point around that time. 19th of October was my lunar return on the new moon. Absolutely, this was the breaking point. Do you understand what we're talking about? So when you look at your chart and you see aspect, you're basically looking at pairs. You're looking at two entities, two forces having to talk to each other. And they are either a conjunction, an opposition, whatever aspect it is, they are talking to each other. But not only are they talking to each other, they are at a particular phase that initially started at the conjunction. So this is a lot to take in, but that's where we're going. So what we're going to do as we see Angie's example, that, you know, if we were to look at Angie biography, and you can go, Angie, and do some research and look back at all the Venus-Mars conjunction times and see, you know, where they were in your chart and if there were significant relationship developments. The other thing you can do is go, the other track is trying to see every time there was a crisis, you know, a breakup or meeting a new person, see where Mars, Venus were, and if they were in a cycle of some sort. Because the fact that you're born under a Mars-Venus conjunction means that you are going to be immediately responsive to that cycle. So all of us are, but those who are born with it are more so. I was born during a Mars-Venus square. So even if it's not a conjunction, it also affects me more directly because I am part of the Venus-Mars phasal development. On the 19th, Jupiter in Scorpio was exactly squaring her Venus in Leo, and the Sun was exactly squaring her Mars in Cancer. Yeah. So, but the crisis began before the 19th. If I understand correctly. Okay. So the bottom line is that, you know, the issues don't have to be activated on the actual exact precise conjunction, but in the zone. You know, it is before and after. That's something to pay attention to. Now, if we look at Angie's chart, that's, you know, we saw the Mars-Venus. Now, she's also going to be very responsive to the Neptune-Jupiter opposition. Not only when they're opposing, but anytime there is a significant aspect between Jupiter and Neptune, something is going to be activated. What? we need to understand what Jupiter and Neptune are about as a pair, and then we are going to track their cycle through time and see, like a clock, conjunction, sextile, square, trine, quincunx, opposition, moments, experiences, realization, crisis are going to be activated. And that's what we're continuing to do next week. So, as a homework, go back to your chart, to your natal chart, and identify those, start with the conjunctions that you have, and identify the pairs that are working together. And track them, list them. And try to see in your life, look at it, go to an ephemeris, and try to see each time there was a conjunction between these planets, within 6 months of that conjunction, if there were important developments in your life in the areas related to that. So let's use another example. Yeah, conjunctions up to 10 degrees. Here, volunteer their chart. Heather. So here's Heather's chart. She was born in 69, with that big combo that she was born with a Concorde. And so she's going to be very responsive again to all these planets, the Pluto-Jupiter cycle, the Jupiter-Uranus cycle, Pluto-Uranus cycle, are going to be very important marking points. So once again, Heather, go back to 1981, go back to 2007, 2008, and if see if there was any kind of career change or relocation or breakthrough. Heather, yes, in 2008, graduated from second degree nursing school. And that, graduation, Jupiter. So she's in the Pluto-Jupiter cycle. It's in Virgo in her natal chart. So it has to do with medicine. And there, in 2008, as we have a new conjunction, she's graduating nursing school. Angelina, only conjunction or opposition, squares also. Start with the conjunctions, obviously you can do everything, but I think you'll have enough work with your conjunctions. So thank you, everyone. And if you have more questions, you can send emails.